Cyber Uncut. Discover the changing face of business, government and national security as Australia navigates the cyber revolution.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You are listening to the Cyber Uncut podcast. My name is David Hollingworth. I am the Deputy Editor of Cyber Daily. And today we are chatting with Graham Fairley, Chief Information Security Officer at PEXA. He's joining us at the upcoming Australian Cyber Summit. I believe he's on a panel with me, in fact. So we're here to give a bit of a sneak preview and to talk about the role of CISO in the business. And the role of CISO in the business isn't just a security role, isn't that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And thanks, David. Like, really excited to join you today and have a good chat in this space. But yeah, definitely around cybersecurity and bringing it to life from business risk elements and what does it actually mean in terms of business outcomes is a large part of how we're translating the security risks and fundamentals into how can we bring it to life in terms of those outcomes.
So how are you embedding cybersecurity as a core business function into the way a business operates day to day, rather than it being a standalone thing of, well, we've got the cyber guys over there, I guess we'll just do our own thing?
Exactly. It's really, it's first of all, it's understanding what is the actual business risk and appetite and fundamentally having a really good understanding, I guess, of the commercially, what is the business trying to do? And all of those facets of understanding, the business fundamentals so that we can then bring to life around, the security risks. There's a lot of AI and growth around the threat side of things. So being able to translate all of those various elements and bring them to life in terms of what does it actually mean for, if there's a cyber incident, from what does it actually mean in terms of the dollar costs or the reputational impact to the business, and also being able to trade off, and make those risk assessments around and share and support the business around various business activities, because we can't always target the absolute perfection around cybersecurity. It's how do we actually try and bring it to life and support the business make some of those educated decisions and provide our guidance and experience to bring some of that to life.
Yeah, I guess you're touching on two things there, and I'm already going a little bit off script, so I do apologize. On the one hand, you're talking about the idea of it's not a matter of if you get hacked, but when. So it's going to happen, prepare for it. But on the other side, minimum viable business.
100%. And that's why I really bring it back around to that commercial aspect of it, because fundamentally, we need the business to be viable around that, and that's in terms of our investments and how much we spend on security functions and those sort of things, but also what does it mean if there is an incident? How does that potentially impact our business? So it is a bit of a balancing act around being able to walk that fine line between an adequate amount of investment versus some of the perfection that sometimes we fall into the trap of targeting ultimate perfection, versus using some of the more layered controls and those sort of things. So it's sometimes bringing that level of pragmatism to the party.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at incidents, so for instance, last year's hack of Jaguar Land Rover in the UK and all the supermarket chains and retailers where their businesses just stopped overnight. That just seems like it must be, from your point of view, a perfect storm.
100%. For us, there's, given our position as, national critical infrastructure, that reputational impact is a really big one for us. So, it's not just the cost of, an incident itself. It's also reputationally, what does that do? Is we're a key underpinning part of the Australian, property settlement experience. So reputationally, there's a lot at risk there. it's how do we get the basics right, and try and address some of those sort of things. So it's more than just the pure cost of an incident. It's those reputational and experiential things, and also then regulatory potential impacts and those sort of things. So they're all the types of things that we're trying to balance up when we're trying to factor in and build our cybersecurity strategy, and communicate that with our executives and board.
Yeah, yeah. And something I've heard, particularly from some of my friends at Dragos who focus on this, is that it's not so much about taking a critical infrastructure entity offline for maybe an hour or two, but what that looks like for the public. So it isn't even about the reputation, it's about the idea of, are we safe?
Exactly. Like we do collect, parts of data, and we did a large piece around scam awareness, which
Mm.
was around, community awareness and advocacy around, everyone's got a role to play within the ecosystem. So there's an element of that communication and sharing with our customers and their customers around how to work and operate our platform effectively.
Mm.
But yeah, because there's so many steps in the chain that can be impacted by a cybersecurity attack, that we're trying to minimize those and make sure that we've got compensating controls in place.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, given all of that, and given that when people look at cybersecurity, it often comes with a level of friction, I guess you would say. How do you go about protecting the business without slowing growth, without stopping innovation in its tracks, or impacting that customer experience? How do you sell that to the organization at large?
Yeah, by working pretty closely with all of our stakeholders. We're part of a technology team, so one, staying across what we're doing in that technology space, because there's a resilience aspect to this, but it's also fundamentally understanding my customers internally within the business around what are those points of friction and how can we help our customers, what are the friction, like log on experience and those sort of
Mm.
things is an important part for us to understand. What are the pain points that they're experiencing, whether it's a security control or and how can we help around that. So I think fundamentally it comes back to that my earlier comments around there's the commercial aspect and understanding those operational elements, and then we can apply the security controls to those in a pragmatic fashion and work out where's the balancing point of good security, good outcomes, and low friction. Because sometimes having really strong security controls with a lot of friction can result ultimately in a worse outcome to
Mm.
something that is a little bit more nuanced around that. So we're consistently working with our stakeholders in the business, whether it's our customer relations teams and our technology teams on the delivery side, to understand where are those pain points so that we can support them. And technology is always evolving, particularly in the security space, and apply our experience to new and novel ways of potentially building good controls around that sort of thing.
And it's not the kind of journey which ever really has an end either.
It, Very much so.
I hate
It's
to
a
say.
constant evolution. I mean, like, who would have thought 12 months ago that AI would have such a big seat at the table? Things like Anthropics, Mythos, and those sort of things that have hit our desk in the last week or so around the acceleration of that. It's always evolving, and staying current, and having a talented team and a really strong set of partners to support us across security as an outcome is really important. How do we get our information? How do we find out about it? But also, how do we actually bring it to life within what we actually have? Because I don't want to be the one who's always saying we need another tool. We need another tool. It's
We
where's
need to creep further out.
100%. There's that brings it complexity in and of itself as well. That has its own set of challenges there. So yeah, it's always ongoing for sure.
Yeah, yeah. All right. On that note, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to Cyber Uncut. I'm joined by Graham Fairley from PEXA. He is their CISO. And in the last segment, you touched on Claude Mythos, and I can't pass that up. When you read about that, what were your first thoughts?
Um, it's becoming like a bit of an arms race
Mm,
around the knowledge here. Because I think this is just representative of what's out in the market today. So I think I have one eye on the future around. I think all of the models and capabilities are probably going to be heading down this path. So it's how do we get on the front foot and really start thinking about what does it actually mean for us? But then that's the immediate reaction. But then we also I take a step back and I go, well, what are our fundamentals that we're building our security capabilities on, and really have we got good strong fundamentals there around good patching and good layered controls and those sort of things. I think they're going to stand us in good stead. I think that definitely the velocity of say vulnerability management is going to need to vary over time, and I think that's going to be a really interesting one for the whole ecosystem, in general. There's a balance there, and even if some of this is a little bit of PR and marketing from Anthropic, I think that we've seen the acceleration of AI in general. Even in the scam space, we've
mm.
seen the quality of scam emails and BEC compromises really uplift off the back of just simple use of AI. So yeah, I think there's definitely a bit of fire where the smoke is. So I think it's trying to stay across, but once again, we've got a really good network of partners, whether it's our vendors and cybersecurity partners in the threat intelligence space that I think we need to work with closely to collectively face into these challenges.
Yeah. Speaking of that, it's cybersecurity is a team sport. That's something that I've discovered since covering it as a journalist. And I'm sure there are CISOs out there who worry that they are under siege and that they are alone. Are they alone? Because I don't think they are. I think there's a lot of resources out there and
I think
support.
very much so. I think there's a really good community out there of of like-minded CISOs and CIOs that are really good around, particularly in this security space, around sharing their learnings and knowledge around these sort of
Mm.
things. And I think these types of events are which is an opportunity for us to get together and talk about collectively about some of these challenges are really good opportunity for us to talk about some of the our learnings and experiences in various tools and technologies and processes and ways of communicating is really important. So I think there's a wealth of information out there, and to your point, I think definitely also within like the critical infrastructure community and those sort of things, there's lots of information out there that's available to us and to myself that I lean on around trying to stay current in this space. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, that's really good to know. So, I want to talk about engaging with the C-suite. What are some of the tricks that you've learned that separates an influential CEO from someone who just considers themselves a technical cybersecurity operator? How do you cross that line?
Yeah, and I think first of all, there's an element of building your brand and trust, and that's probably having support of a community and a bit of a pathway into, particularly for myself coming into a CISO role. I was well supported by our leaders at the time, in terms of the development in the lead into that. So the exposure to various executives and also the board working closely through some of our committees and forums,
Mm.
which gives a level of comfort around that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You take your imposter syndrome hat off on that front. Um,
That hits no,
yeah.
I feel that personally as well, don't worry.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, there's that brand element around that. And then back to I've touched on it a few points around that commercial, like bringing a bit of that commercial acumen and being able to translate it into that business, those business elements there around working it into ultimately what's the outcomes that we're seeking out of this, not just I've got a really good set of, technical controls or tools and those sort of things, getting out of that sort of mindset into what are we actually delivering in terms of outcomes, and aligning that to try and deliver some of those sort of things, whether it's through an acquisition and, delivering some of those sort of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine a lot of these things will be perceived by people in that C-suite as being part of a cost center. Yeah, you mentioned acquisitions or this or training or that, and that's going to often be seen as, well, could we get away with not doing it? So how do you frame security as a positive enabler rather than an extra cost?
Yeah, look, and I think we've actually had a pretty good success around this. We've actually been using, our security and our capabilities, particularly with the critical infrastructure, as it supports effectively our go-to-market around those sort of things. So we're seeing security as really as an enabler, and it's our license to operate a critical piece of infrastructure for the Australian market here. So we see that as a value add, and we do that through our advocacy as well. But it's being able to tie it back to those outcomes around, well, it allows us to go out and talk to our customers, the big banks, our large panel firms, around, here's everything that we've got, and this is our security program, whether it's our certifications and assurance, to build that up. So that's our value add, how we support our customers from a security point of view. And then the advocacy part is another part around how can we actually try and make some investment into the market through webinars and community events and those sort of things, to really try and bring everyone up through that knowledge sharing and type of activities.
Yeah, once you get everybody buying into the cybersecurity problem, well, you know what they say, it's a problem shared, it's a problem halved. But if you can make everybody in your organization part of that solution, well, it becomes remarkably diluted.
Yeah, and I
In a
think
good
we've
way.
had some pretty good success in terms of getting the buy-in from the business now, being included in some of those conversations, working closely with our customer teams when they're going out and presenting, in their large forums with customer forums and those sort of things. It's quite normal for us to come along and join into the conversations and not just be the occasional, here's the security, the token security person who's come along to talk about it this month, but generally going along a lot of the time, and it might just be one or two questions here or there, but you're at least there listening to what's going on in that space and can step in. So you're both demonstrating the value, but you're also hearing a lot of that, what's going on in the wider market as well.
Yeah. We will take another short break and we'll be right back with a couple more questions before we wrap up. Welcome back to Cyber Uncut. My name's David Hollingworth. I'm joined by Graham Fairley. Now, you mentioned a couple of things there I found fascinating. Your ability to listen. How important is that for a CISO to go out and hear what the company is saying, what the people you're trying to protect, from the receptionist up to the board, to know what they're saying and feeling?
Yeah, I think it's a really key one. Being able to hear what's going on in the business is really important. Once again, it allows us that capability of translating, very technical security controls into those real world sort of things. So, yeah, I try and get out and talk to a lot of, whether it's in the business and, our customer teams and internal operations and, what's going on in our workplace technology and our hub and support teams around where are the various, what's causing them a bit of friction? Like, are they getting a lot of password resets? Or why are they getting it? So trying to understand those sort of things, that listening, I think, is critical, because I think that really brings it to life. My view is there's a bit of a danger of just building a security strategy that, does that in isolation and doesn't factor in, the journey that we've all been on, or at least understanding the context of, the history associated with a lot of these things.
Yeah. I've been at companies myself where the limit of cybersecurity training is that 6 monthly email, the phishing email that you're meant not to fall for. And like, that's it. And that doesn't seem enough, especially given the prevalence of social engineering as a main access method these days.
Very much so. I mean, the people element of our cybersecurity program, and I say that across the board, that people element is a key one for us. Being able to, we see our people are our last line of defense. Ultimately, that's the difference between someone clicking on an email or reaching out for because we've got good relationships with everyone and those sort of things. So it's pulling together an awareness program that's pretty comprehensive. It's not just, to your point, let's do our compliance training on a periodic basis. Tick. No, it's like we've been doing a lot around multi-channels. So we've got our Slack and we've got emails. We run a lot of events within the business. We've recently just done with another one of our partners a really good deep dive for our friends and family, and having kids come in and do a couple of hours around general cybersecurity basics, and that was eye-opening, I think, for a lot of the business around that aspect. And the feedback we got from that was fantastic. So it's lots of different styles of approaches. We've done let's really ramp up our phishing capabilities deliberately in line with what we're seeing in the market as another opportunity. We don't see it as a bad. It's another opportunity for us to touch base with people through another avenue and bring some of that to life. Because we've had near misses and those sort of things where it's been the person behind the keyboard has been the one that's actually stopped and thought about what's going on.
All right, one last question, and it kind of encapsulates, I think, a lot of what you've been saying previously, but from some aspects of running a business, there's a lot that gets your attention. How can a CISO build their credibility internally to manage those competing priorities? How can you put your hand up, basically?
Yeah, like that's a great question. And around how can you put your hand up there? I think it's really about having that strong relationships with the executive team around understanding what are the pain points for now, and being able to bring them back to, because it's a two-way street, right? There's times when various parts of the business and executives will come like, this is really important, we need support on delivering this outcome. But then there's also times where we've got the license where we'll come in and say, like, right, there's a CVE that's come out and that's critical. We've got to pull together and get behind it. So I see it's really having that two-way street and that trust and brand, to be able to build that up to go, look, when it's possible, we're not going to use it all the time, but when we come and say we need to do something, we'd like, we really need buy-in and support around that. And I think that's built up over time, by supporting and that level of pragmatism that we can bring to each and every one of those conversations that go on to support the business.
And going back to what you said earlier, realizing that you are not alone, that there are a community of other CISOs out there and organizations and threat intelligence experts and what have you that are there to help you do that.
Very much so. Very much so.
Graham, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate this. I cannot wait to actually meet you in person at the event. And speaking of the event, it is on April 30 in Sydney. Tickets are available now. The Australian Cyber Summit 2026. If you go to cyberdaily.au, trust me, you will not be able to get away from the marketing. I hope you can see all of us there. Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you.
Fantastic, David. Thanks for having me today.